Good morning. Welcome to another session on environmental impact assessment.
Unit 5 case studies. Course outcome describe the EIA for various infrastructure projects. Learning outcome explain the EIA for housing projects. Specific outcomes explain the impact of apartments or house construction on the environment. So we already started this session and we have seen some of the impacts. We'll continue from wherever we left in the last half. Locational factors and planning. It is in the areas of location selection, design of settlement and infrastructure, and type of dwelling that the environmental impacts of housing projects lie. Not only natural factors but also the activities of planners need to be considered. Often, in the very areas which are out of question for development or the building of new buildings or new dwellings, there may be already be illegal squatter settlements and hence a requirement for rehabilitation. Right. So generally, people tend to take up the public areas and public land and they build some houses. So you need to rehabilitate them or resettle them before you go into construction of buildings in those areas. So proper planning is required, right, before construction begins. Many countries are situated in zones subject to earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, and landslips caused by erosion. The regions where the majority of such natural hazards occur are known. Seldom, however, can their occurrence be predicted. So it's very difficult to predict them. Early warning times of a few days are exceptional. It is often a matter of few hours. So generally, it happens within a few hours of getting the information that an earthquake is going to come or a volcanic eruption is going to take place or flood is going to occur. Right. So don't have that much time to uh, evacuate the people. It is therefore important to have regional monitoring systems for appropriate protective precautions to have been taken and for expertise in disaster prevention and rescue to be readily available. Right. So it's not only construction of buildings. We need to look at the disaster management aspect also. How we will evacuate those people, and is there any transportation system for them? How fast they can be shifted to the new town or next city or something like that. Many large towns are particularly at risk because, for historical reasons, they are often situated on estuaries, at river crossings, on deltas, or in basin-like depressions. When this is the case, locations where the geomorphological situation is better should be sought, at least when satellite settlements are going to be established. Satellite meaning remote settlements. Possible consequences of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, storms are the destruction of buildings and parts of the infrastructure, earth slips, floods, fire. Location at risk from the natural phenomena should be avoided wherever possible for housing projects. Where this is not possible or where built-up areas already exist, special precautions should be taken in respect of design of settlement and infrastructure and types of dwellings. When the layout of the settlement is being decided, high-density housing should be placed at low-risk areas and the plans must provide adequate access for rescue vehicles. Parts of the infrastructure particularly at risk, such as the water supply, the wastewater discharge system, and the electricity supply should be designed to be hazard resistant to local standards where they exist. In some cases, this will make them considerably more expensive. The building should have hazard resistant structures and wherever possible, structural provisions of this kind should be incorporated into the existing buildings. Examples of such provisions are wooden frames and solid proofing with no sharp edges. When blown off in storm, sharp edged sheet metal roofing creates a further hazard. However, such provisions must be weighed against the cost involved, particularly when applied to existing buildings. So you need to make a balance between the cost and the hazardous effect of those metal sheets. Although hilly country offers greater protection from flooding, there is still the risk of landslides and mud flows. Slopes in zones subject to erosion and riverbanks are often a favorite location for uncontrolled settlements. In such cases, the financial impact of reducing the risk has to be weighed against the cost of opting for an alternative location. Buildings on steep slopes will need to be suitably anchored and supported. Where built-up areas are sited on rocky subgrade, this creates drainage problems. It costs more to lay the services infrastructure underground, and sanitary systems are more difficult to install because of the need for machinery to be used, especially when the subgrade or the ground surface is very rocky. It's very difficult to provide these things. On wetlands or in lakeside areas, building costs go up, and such areas should not be considered as possible locations. Wetlands have to be drained or filled, as well as the ecological consequences of doing this. Additional costs will be incurred for suitable machinery, and the opportunities for self-help are limited. Considerable problems will also arise with hygiene. as well as the possible adverse nature of the ground described above. Another problem that particularly affects the siting of dwellings is old pits and dumps for the disposal of solid waste and abandoned industrial sites, collectively called as contaminated sites. Hazards that exist at places like these are subsidence due to inadequate compacting, fires or explosions resulting from methane release, unpleasant odors, and contamination of water. For such areas to be used for lightweight buildings or rehabilitation, comprehensive appraisals of the potential hazards will be needed, meaning we need to evaluate those areas before we start construction. Floods are a seasonal phenomenon caused both by heavy precipitation and by storms, and their effects are aggravated by the sealing of the ground surface, which is a necessary part of settlement. They result in contamination of drinking water, overflow of the private and public discharge and drainage infrastructure, erosion, damage to buildings, and increase of breeding grounds for disease carrying pests, and in worst case, fatalities. Though cheap, land subject to periodic flooding requires large investment in drainage system and protective structures. Incorrect drainage may lead to groundwater pollution. Open drains for surface water, though simple to lay, can easily be blocked by the sediment load, plant growth, and uncontrolled waste disposal. Constant cleaning of the drainage system is necessary on health grounds or health aspects. Individual building can be protected from flooding by building them on platforms or elevated piles. Vectors of infectious diseases, toxic chemicals from industries, and natural constituents such as very high salt or metal contents are causes of water pollution. They require cleaning techniques, though known, are often impossible to finance due to their high running costs. What is important is for the drinking water to be adequately protected from pollution at the source, in the pipes, and at takeoff points. Land allocation has an important part to play in dealing with the environmental aspects of housing projects by suitably allocating land to uses that do not interfere with one another or to do so to only a minor degree, or by separating mutually intrusive areas in rehabilitation projects. It is normally possible to reduce the problems with emissions. By selecting appropriate locations for communal amenities and businesses, and by planning transport capacities to match, it is possible to reduce the transport service required and enhance energy consumption and emissions. Building density is an important factor in housing projects and one that creates environmental problems. The closer together the buildings, the smaller the amount of unoccupied space left for grass areas, trees, and other plant cover. This affects the local microclimate, the hydrological cycle, and the quality of air. The setting aside of ground for open spaces is thus an effective way of improving the environmental situation in residential areas, especially in hot, humid climates. However, there are costs involved because the open spaces take up land and that could otherwise be built on, and they have to be looked after if they are to go on performing their function. Right. So we need to plan, the distance between different buildings so that you provide space for plants, trees, and plant coverings, meaning plant growths, so that the climate is, meaning it doesn't result in global warming or changes in microclimate. A widespread practice in building projects is to remove existing trees from land for dwellings in the construction phase. This should be avoided as far as possible. Climatic design principles based on natural ventilation should be carefully applied in residential buildings and buildings of other purposes. If there is no way of avoiding air conditioning systems, then care must be taken to see that substitutes are used for hydrochlorofluorocarbons. The use of energy in homes will depend on disposable income and the energy resources available. For high and middle income groups, the most widely used forms of energy are electricity and gas bottles. In areas where incomes are low, traditional energy sources such as wood, kerosene, charcoal, refuse, and dung will be widely used. These, however, are a major source of air pollution. The burning of firewood and charcoal is one of the main causes of deforestation and subsequent problems with erosion. One radical alternative to such fuels is the use of solar energy, which is employed for heating, cooking via solar cells, or for generating electricity also. There is vast potential here for the use of urban areas also, right? So urban areas can also do this. To avoid existing or anticipated bottlenecks in the supply of building materials, to increase productivity in terms of finished dwellings, and to cut costs, thought should be given to what building materials and techniques are to be adopted. Metal roofs, for example, though easy to install and maintain, create climate problems in buildings and where they have to be imported, tie up foreign currency. The use of suitable local materials can help in improving the housing conditions and will boost the local economy. The point at which the unrestricted use of local materials becomes unacceptable is where resources become overexploited or where it may cause health risks, such as when asbestos containing materials are used. Although there is very little that individual projects can do to influence product ranges. Any opportunities that occur to do so should be exploited in the full. Right. So what they are saying is better to use local materials than to go for foreign materials. And it is also important to see that the materials that are used even locally are free from, you know, uh, some hazard causing materials like asbestos containing materials, etc., which create health problems. The gearing of buildings and rooms to the cultural customs of the population and the aesthetic standards of such buildings and rooms are important factors that may cause social impacts. So we are looking at social impacts now. Studies of the cultural values, ways of life, and physical and functional requirements of the target groups will provide pointers in the above aspects for shaping the project. Changing the use of an area always has impacts on neighboring areas. These need to be catered for by means of precautionary planning where, for example, there are areas at risk from erosion close to areas of new housing. The latter areas will need protection. The same will be true where there are areas of forest or woodland situated close to residential areas where the residents produce their energy in traditional ways. Finally, of all the members of family, women, often in the capacity of the head of the household, spend most of the time working at home and they are thus the major beneficiaries of improvements in housing. This is why special consideration must be given to their interests in the course of planning and implementation. Right. So at least for their sake, proper precautions must be taken, and also to protect the environment. Thank you.
Thus, we come to the end of this session. Thank you for your participation. Looking forward to meeting you in the next session.